12 Years Across Borders. A memoir by Ch.2. Chapter 2. The Passenger Seat. Before we begin, one note. What follows is a record of 12 years of work as a cross-border medical coordinator. It is a more not medical advice and not a treatment recommendation. If you or someone in your family is facing a similar situation, please speak with your own physician. Alright, let's begin. After H died, the phone did not stop. I had assumed in the summer of 2014 that H was a one-off. A single family, a single trip, a single envelope of cash at the end of it, and then back to the thesis. What I found over the autumn that followed was that H was the first of a line that stretched, as I would eventually understand, across every socio-economic stratum of the island I had come from. The first 3 calls came in September, then 5 in October, then 10, then more. By the spring of 2015, the phone on my desk in the small Oreo apartment was ringing, on average 4 or 5 times a day. Line messages came in at all hours. An old classmate in Taipei, whose brother in law had been diagnosed, forwarded my number to a cousin, who forwarded it to a colleague, who forwarded it to someone who ran a small factory in Taiwan. My number, it turned out, was circulating inside a network I had not known existed. A quiet, word-of-mouth network of Taiwanese families whose physicians had told them there is nothing more we can do here, and who had decided to try one more thing before they let the news be final. What I learned across that autumn and the winter that followed was that cancer did not choose. It did not care whether the person answering its knock was a construction magnate or a school teacher, a civil servant with 30 years in the ministry, or a man who was of line of work was conducted in the grey corridor between legal and illegal. Cancer arrived, and once it had arrived, the person it had visited became, first and foremost, a patient. Everything else they had spent a lifetime building: reputation, rank, the particular swagger of a man who has run a crew of 60 workmen for two decades, fell away at the threshold of the consulting room. This chapter is about the people who sat in my passenger's seat on the drive down to Kurume, and about what I learned watching them, about the peculiar equalizing force of a syringe pressed into subcutaneous tissue. Before I tell you about the people, I have to tell you about the car. My own car in that period was a 20-year-old Honda Kei, a kei-car, the smallest legal class of passenger vehicle in Japan, 660Z. The footprint of a sofa. I had bought it used for 80,000 and 1,000, about 760, only 14 rates from a lot in Kyushu that sold cars to students and pensioners. It ran. Above 70 km, it began to shake. On an uphill grade, it gave up on speed and asked politely to be downshifted. Putting a cancer patient into that car for a 90-minute expressway drive from Fukuoka to Kurume was not something I was going to do. So every time a family flew in, I took the local train down to Hakata, walked to the rental counter near the station, and rented a white Toyota Aqua. The Aqua was in 2014 the best-selling hybrid in Japan. It cost about $8 a day, roughly 76. Quiet ride, good air conditioning, trunk big enough for 3 small suitcases and a wheelchair if the patient had gotten to that stage. I paid for the Aqua out of my own pocket. I could have folded the rental into the fee I billed the family. That would have been the ordinary thing to do. I did not do it because very early I had drawn a line for myself about what the work was and what it was not. The line was thin and probably arbitrary. It said the money the family pays me is for my time and my translation. The cost of getting them safely to the clinic is mine. The rental counter staff got used to me inside of 2 months. Lin send the aqua again. Yes, the aqua again. Same address to pick up, same direction to drive. Over the next 2 years I would rent that car, or one exactly like it, more than 100 times. The click of a passenger's side seatbelt latching into place. I still hear it sometimes in dreams. Every first call started the same way. Mr. Lin, I got your number from a name, a cousin, a classmate, a colleague, a friend of a friend. I would write the referring name in the top margin of a yellow legal pad. Then the caller would clear his or her throat and ask the 2 questions. Does it work? How much does it cost? The second question was easier. I could recite the costs in my sleep by Christmas. The Kurume clinical trial itself, as a trial, was not expensive by the standards of private cancer care in Tokyo. It was a research program. Patients were, in a real sense, contributing data as well as paying fees. The per-session cost at trial pricing was modest that compared with the commercial immunotherapy clinics springing up in Ginza and Roppongi. That was the medical bill. The rest of the bill, which nobody ever quoted up front, was what broke families. Round-trip flights from Taipei to Fukuoka once a week for weeks at a stretch. Hotel nights in Fukuoka. Meals for the patient and often a spouse, my fee, the aqua, parking. The small gifts for the nurses that a Taiwanese family will always insist on bringing, even when you tell them it is not necessary. And then, invisibly, the lost income back home. The wife who could not go to work. The son running the family business one-handed while his father was abroad. When you totaled it, a single course of treatment came to the rough equivalent of a down payment on a small apartment in Taipei. For most of the families calling me, that number was extractable only by selling something. An apartment, a parcel of farmland, a small business. A life insurance policy cashed in 20 years early. The follow-up questions were always the same. Can we do it in installments? The hospital cannot. Hospital billing in Japan is cash or credit at point of service. Full amount, no payment plan. I'm sorry. Will our insurance cover it? That depends on your specific policy in Taiwan. Some policies reimburse overseas self-paid treatment after the fact. Some do not. I cannot tell you which yours is. You have to call your insurance company. Can you get me a discount? On the hospital fee, no. The fee is posted on the university website. It is the same number for me, for you, for the person who called yesterday. I can help you save on hotels and flights. I cannot move the hospital's price. I learned to say all of this in a flat, repeatable voice, the way a customer service agent reads from a script. Not because I did not care. Because if I let the answer get warm, if I started sympathizing with the sticker shock, I would end up promising something I could not deliver. Flat was safer than warm. Flat was accurate. The first question, though, does it work? That one had no flat answer. I will not write down. Here's the response, rate number doctor, IT had given me in the consultation room in the summer of 2014. I explained in the last chapter why I was not going to write it. And the reason has not changed. Of a number from an investigational trial in progress is not the same thing as a claim of efficacy for a licensed therapy. And the distinction matters. What I can tell you is that it was a real number from a real trial discussed in a real room with real patients, and that it was neither a promise nor a refusal. It lived in the worst possible zone for a translator, because it was exactly the kind of number a listener would hear according to whatever they had already decided before they picked up the phone. I gave that number over the phone in Mandarin flat many times. What I learned is that the same number was 4 different sentences, depending on who was on the other end. One caller heard one chance in a handful. I have a chance. I'm coming. One caller heard almost no chance. That is not enough. I'm staying home. One caller heard well, I have no other option, so. One caller heard that is fraud, you are fraud. I'm hanging up. Same number. 4 lives. 4 different decisions about whether to sell the apartment, whether to buy the plane ticket, whether to put the father on the flight. My job was not to tilt the 4. My job was to deliver the number in Mandarin, in Dr. IT's tone, with no adjustment. The family's ear was the family's ear. Whatever they heard, they heard. The phrase cross-border medicine has a certain gloss to it in English. It suggests glass-walled lobbies, quiet corridors, perhaps a discreet fountain. The reality was grubbier than that. The Kurume peptide vaccine was not an infusion. It was a subcutaneous injection. 4 needles, in 4 separate sites, the back of the neck, under each arm, the inner thigh near the groin. When the peptide went in, it did not disperse immediately. A raised mound formed beneath the skin. The patients and I over time stopped finding better words for it. The bumps, everyone called them that. These bumps hurt. For patients already sleeping badly because of the disease, the firm lumps under the skin meant that a single roll in bed became a small act of waking up. Sideways, the arm bump pressed against the mattress. On the back, the neck bump complained. Patients would wake 3-4 times in a night. By the time they arrived in the passenger seat the following morning, the circles under their eyes would be a shade darker than the week before. Mr. Lin, last night I was only able to turn over 3 times. The patient who said that to me was not complaining. He was reporting. He had taken to counting so that he give Dr. IT accurate information about how his body was doing. It is a small thing to record, but I think it matters. The pain of those bumps was the one part of the process that the wealthy and the not wealthy endured on identical terms. The man who had flown business class and the woman who had stitched together 3 LCC legs to get to Fukuoka got the same needles, to the same depth, at the same 4 sites. Money had bought them a great many things in their lives. It could not buy them a different needle. Before I started this work, I had a more abstract picture of immunotherapy. Test tubes, culture media, microscopes, white coats. A clean, almost ceremonial image. The first thing the job sanded off that picture was the cleanness. Treatment in practice meant pushing a needle into the skin of a person who had flown in from Taiwan the day before, raising a lump under that skin, and in doing so shortening their sleep for the next several nights. Every patient before the first trip told me the same thing. Mr. Lin, do not tell anyone about this. I assumed for the first few months that this was embarrassment, a cultural thing. Cancer carries a weight in Taiwanese society as it does in many East Asian societies. Illness is talked about in a low voice, inside the family, not at dinner parties. I understood the embarrassment. I did not question it. What I eventually understood was that the secrecy was not about shame. It was about money. A general contractor from Taichung, a man who ran a firm with 38 employees, explained it to me plainly on the drive home one afternoon. The stretch of Route 3 outside Tozu, the rice paddies scrolling past, the windshield humming faintly in the crosswind. Oh, Mr. Lin, if my clients find out I have cancer, I lose every job I am currently bidding on. The day after the news gets out, my competitors will be on the phone with those clients saying, "He cannot finish the contract. Come to us." My line of credit at the bank gets reviewed the same week. A reviewed line of credit gets cut. A cut line of credit means I cannot meet payroll at the end of the month. No payroll, the company folds. My cancer becomes 38 people's unemployment. He looked straight ahead through the windshield. I'm asking you not to tell anyone, because telling anyone is literally the end of the thing I have spent 20 years building. Do you understand? I understood. Credit, I realized that afternoon, attaches not to a person's character, but to their health. The moment a business owner gets sick, it's the invisible machinery around him begins to reprice him. Our bankers recalculate. Suppliers tighten terms. Rivals pick up the phone. The company can tip in a matter of weeks, before the owner has even finished the second round of chemotherapy. After that drive, my phone habits changed permanently. I stopped using patient names on calls. I stopped saying the name of the disease on any call anyone might overhear. I developed a private code on my notes. Patients became letters of the alphabet, cycled through as old cases closed and new ones opened. Hospitals became numbers. Treatments became abbreviations that would mean nothing to a stranger glancing at my notebook over my shoulder in a coffee shop. When I write this book a decade later, I am still using those letters. Mr. T, Ms. B, Mr. H, Mr. The old habit is hard to put down. It is also, I think, the right habit. The people in these pages trusted me with information that could have ended their careers. The least I can do in return is continue to protect them, even in a book that most of them will, in any case, never read. Cancer is a medical event. In Taiwan and in most of the societies I have worked in, it is also a social event. A social event, I learned, that can bankrupt a family faster than the disease itself. Between the autumn of 2014 and the spring of 2016, I drove, by my own rough count, somewhere between 70 and 90 patients down to Kurume in that white aqua. Sometimes more than one in a day if two families happen to be in Fukuoka at once. Sometimes none for a week. The people in the passenger seat came from everywhere. A general contractor from Taichung, the man I described a few pages ago, who ran a construction firm with 40 employees. Hence squared off at the knuckles. He had decided, driving to his first hospital appointment in Taipei, that he would not stop bidding on jobs while he was sick, because stopping meant losing. He did not stop bidding. He died about a year later still holding a live proposal on a bridge project he did not live to see awarded. A civil servant from Taipei, 55, stage of gastric cancer. Quietly furious for the entire drive, most weeks. He had paid into the health insurance system for 30 years, and the system, he felt, had not held up its end of the bargain. His anger was not pointed at any one person. It was pointed at the era, at the institutions, at the shape of his own life. Once, looking at the sound barrier along the expressway, he said, more to himself than then to me, this was not how it was supposed to go. A semiconductor process engineer from Ch.2, whose technical Mandarin was better than mine. He asked me to translate the Japanese informed consent forms clause by clause, and then argued with me about the precision of specific terms. Mr. Lin is the Japanese definition of adverse event, here the same as the FDA definition. I did not always know. We looked things up together on the drive with his phone on the dashboard. A man who argues about diction on the way to his first infusion is a man who has not yet handed over the subject of his own sentence. A school teacher from Kaohsiung whose primary school students had taken up a collection to help pay for her first trip. She told me about it in the car and then could not finish the sentence. Not a loud cry, a steady leak for 20 minutes somewhere around Tosu. Her own family had not noticed soon enough. The children had and had acted first. She could not reconcile the two. We stopped at a rest area. She washed her face. We kept going. An insurance salesman from Taiwan who, on the drive home from his third appointment, sold me a policy. I told him I already had life insurance. He sold me another one. I pay the premium to this day. He continued selling policies, almost to the week of his death. It was his own answer to the question of how to spend what was left. And then, obliquely, a man whose line of work had taken him for most of his adult life along the edge where legality becomes an elastic concept. I will not say more about who he was. He trusted me, and I owe him that. The morning of his first appointment, I was tense at the rental counter. I expected difficulty, haggling on the fee, pressure at the clinic desk, the particular edge you brace for from a man accustomed to being obeyed. None of it happened. He paid the full amount in cash before the trip. He arrived in the hotel lobby 5 minutes early for every pickup. He addressed Dr. IT as sensei without fail. When Dr. IT delivered his response rate number in his customary quiet register, this man listened, nodded, and replied in carefully practiced Japanese Waikarima-shita, "Onegashimasu. I understand. Please proceed." On the drive back from one of those appointments, looking out at the stubble of a post-harvest rice field, he said, almost to no one, "Mr. Lin, in my life, I have never once done something simply because I was told to. This is the first time. I did not know what to say. I said nothing." He went on. "In my work, when the body tells you to stop, you stop. You do not argue with the body." He was by some distance the easiest patient I handled across those 2 years. A career I would not recommend to anyone had taught him, more precisely than any MBA, the difference between what can and cannot be negotiated with. The hardest patients, it turned out, were not the laborers or the teachers or the men from the grey corridor. The hardest patients were the corporate executives. The men set, and they were almost always men who had spent 20 or 30 years at the top of a hierarchy in which the world obeyed them. When they heard from Dr. IT, "This is the protocol. If it does not suit, there is no obligation to participate," their reflex was to push, to negotiate, to propose a different schedule, a different dose, a smaller number of visits that would better accommodate a board meeting in Shanghai. Dr. IT would wait patiently for my translation to finish, and then repeat in the same even tone, "This is the protocol." A life of pushing and getting results does not prepare a person for the one room where pushing does not work. Cancer is that room. There was a man I will call L. L came to me as a family member, accompanying a relative through the Kurume trial. I met him in the clinic waiting area one morning in the spring of 2015, nearly dressed my age or perhaps a year or two older, quiet. He shook my hand, thanked me for the help, and then in the first 2 minutes of conversation, asked a question no family member had ever asked me before. The peptide they're using in this trial, is it the HLA restricted? I blinked. HLA restriction is the technical term for whether a peptide vaccine's target works only for patients with certain tissue type profiles. It is a question that belongs on the intake form in a biotech company boardroom, not in a clinic waiting area. It is not the kind of question a person asks because they read a Wikipedia page the night before. It is the kind of question a person asks because they have been sitting in cell, therapy, do diligence meetings for a living. Yes, I said carefully. The trial screens for HI type. Not every patient is eligible. L nodded. The cell processing audit trail. Is it available to see? Another question that does not come from a family member. Are you a physician? A faint smile. No, family member. His relative was called into the consultation. I went in to interpret. L sat through the appointment and asked almost nothing. What he did, I realized later, was watch. He watched Dr. IT's body language. He watched the nurse's intake procedure. He watched the equipment visible through the half, open door of the treatment bay, and the arrangement of desks at the reception counter. He was not looking at his relative. He was looking at the operation. His relative's course of treatment did not go well. The disease had advanced further than any of us had hoped. The relative passed away in Taiwan about 6 months later. L handled the arrangements, paid the outstanding invoice within 48 hours without being prompted, and dropped off my contact list. 2 years later, in the summer of 2017, called, Mr. Lin, do you happen to come to Taipei? There is something I would like to show you. I flew down the following month. He picked me up at Taiwan Airport, drove me out to an industrial park on the edge of the city, and took me up to the 4th floor of a glass-fronted building. Behind 2 sets of airlocks was a cell processing center, clean room, rated, with temperature and pressure controls visible on digital panels at the door. Behind the glass, technicians in full gowns worked under laminar flow hoods. The design had been done by people who knew what they were designing. We built this in 2016, he said. The technology is licensed from a US institution. The family decision to invest was made after my relative died. I stood in the observation corridor and did the arithmetic backward. The man who had sat beside me in the Kurume waiting room in 2015, asking about HI restriction in a quiet voice that had sounded like a civilian question, had been, at the same time, an executive of a Taiwanese industrial group, there partly as a grieving family member and partly to scout a technology. His grief had been real. I had watched him at the bedside, and you cannot fake what I saw. But alongside the grief, in the same man at the same time, there had been a second process running, a market research process. Which of these investigational therapies is substantive? Which is theater? We were to bring this category of medicine home. What would the facility have to look like? Who would we need to hire? What would it cost? There is a version of this story in which L is cold, almost inhuman, mining his own family's tragedy for business intelligence. There is another version in which L is a rational man who, having watched someone he loved die in a trial that did not work, decided that the most honorable response was to build at home a better version of what had failed. I am not sure even now which version is closer to the truth. I suspect both. He offered me a role in the Taiwan operation that day. I did not say yes. I will explain why later in a chapter about a different investor and the different decision I was making at roughly the same time. What I want to record here is a small observation, almost a footnote. L had an older brother. The brother had spent his working life up to that point running a small convenience store franchise in central Taiwan. When the store's business began to fail, around the time L was building the laboratory, L brought him into the company. By the time I visited 3 years in, the brother was running the administrative side of the facility well enough to answer my questions about patient flow without checking with anyone upstream. "How did you end up in this line of work?" I asked him. My younger brother called me. That was all. Standing there, I thought about myself. A materials engineering master's graduate working as a medical interpreter, running a cross-border cancer referral service. The bridge between what I had been educated to do and what I was doing had not been laid by any career counselor. It had been laid by a phone call I picked up in a university lab in the summer of 2014. Those brothers' bridge had been laid by a phone call from his younger brother 3 years later. "Do you want to come run something new?" Careers in the real world do not run along the rails as a curriculum lays down. They run along the lines of the phone calls you answer. Credentials are a lagging indicator. Proximity is the leading one. In the early summer of 2015, a Taiwanese cable news crew flew in to do a segment on cross-border cancer care. I had not pitched them. I still do not know exactly who gave them my name. It was probably one of the patient families, passing a reporter's business card to a friend, the way they had passed my number to a cousin. The producer called me in late May. The crew was in Fukuoka by the second week of June. I had never been on television. I did not know the protocol. I did not know the difference between a B-roll shot and an on-camera interview. I did not know that you were supposed to have a rehearsed answer for the question, "What got you into this work?" I answered the questions the way I would have answered them in a conversation. The producer seemed to think that was fine. We spent 3 days shooting. Kurume on the first day, with Dr. IT's permission, and Kei, the coordinator nurse's patient, helped with the logistics. A Fukuoka hospital on the second day for a scene about the broader medical landscape. A short sequence at Fukuoka airport on the third day showing arrivals. The segment aired on cable news in Taiwan a few weeks later. It ran maybe 8 minutes. The phone on my desk rang in the 48 hours after broadcast, approximately 40 times an hour. I am not exaggerating. I still have the call log on an old backup drive somewhere. The messaging app notifications came in faster than the phone because the messaging apps could queue. By the Tuesday after broadcast, I had more than 300 unread messages across line, Facebook, and email. All of them some version "My father has been diagnosed. Can you help? Please call me back." For 2 weeks I did not sleep properly. I took calls from 6 a.m. to midnight. I ate at my desk. I stopped opening my thesis on the laptop because I could not keep 2 things in my head at once. and if I had to choose one, it was not going to be epoxy resin. Somewhere in the middle of the second week, I was driving the Aqua on the expressway back to Fukuoka from Kurume with a patient and his wife in the back, and I realized that I had no memory of getting onto the on-ramp. I had been driving for 20 minutes in traffic on the kind of autopilot a brain defaults to when it has not slept, carrying two people who were counting on me to get them home safely. I pulled off at the next rest area, parked, sat in the driver's seat for 3 minutes, drank half a bottle of water, and made a decision about the future. I was going to have to stop being a graduate student. I still had the NATE, the formal internal offer from the semiconductor packaging inspection company in Tita. Start date April 2016. This is the standard Japanese new graduate entry point. Stable salary around $250 a month to start, roughly 2 odd 400. Company housing, health insurance, pension, a clear career ladder. The job every other materials engineering graduate in my program would have been pleased to accept. I could not take it. If I started in April, I would have to stop driving to Kurume. I would have to pass the patients to someone else, and there was no one else. There was one other Taiwanese interpreter in the Kurume, a man who had settled locally through marriage, and he was already at capacity. If I left the field would not smoothly pass the work to a successor. It would simply shrink. 40 families a month calling my number would call, and hear nobody. I did not think of this in heroic terms. I did the arithmetic. I also did not have a business plan. I did not have capital. The business manager visa, which was the only legal path to staying in Japan as a founder, required me $5 million in paid up capital, about $47 in 2015 rates. I did not have $5 million. I did not have a plan to get it. I took a long walk one evening in Oreo. The neighborhood was quiet. A salaryman was walking his dog past the convenience store. I thought with a clarity I rarely had in those months, if I take the offer, I will be that salaryman in 10 years. There is nothing wrong with that life. It is not my life. I went home, wrote the withdrawal email in formal Japanese, apologized several times, thanked them for the offer, and sent it. The HR contact called back within the hour. Len-sen, are you sure? This offer was not easy to get. If I withdraw it now, the slot is filled by someone else, and I cannot recover it for you later. Oh, I am sure. I'm very sorry. A short silence on the line. I wish you good luck. I bowed into the phone, the way Japanese people bow into phones, and hung up. What I felt was not triumph. I felt sick in the stomach. I had just walked away from the first stable job I had been offered in my life. My parents in Taiwan did not yet know. My wife knew and had not told me not to do it, but I could see she was afraid. I was afraid too. Between that autumn and the following spring, a meaningful number of the patients I had driven down to Kurume, whose seatbelts I had heard clicking into place next to me, died, sometimes mid-protocol, more often a few weeks or months after they had returned home to Taiwan. One of them was an engineer about my age. He had come over with his wife and 2 small children, received 4 cycles of treatment, flown home. A few weeks later, his condition deteriorated quickly. His wife called me from Taipei, Mr. Lin. Thank you. At the end, he kept saying how beautiful the cherry blossoms were in Japan. After I hung up, I sat at my desk in the office I had just rented. The office that was about to have a company name on the door, for a long time without moving. The hardest thing about this work I was learning is the problem of distance. Come too close and each parting takes a piece of you with it until there is not enough of you left to keep going. Hold too far away and you become a person who sells hope a fee, which is a worse outcome. I had not, in those first 18 months, figured out where to stand on that line. I am not sure, honestly, that I have figured it out in all the years since. I do not remember every face. There have been too many faces and human memory has a ceiling. The faces I do remember. I remember them in fragments. A laugh in the passenger's seat at a joke I have otherwise forgotten. A hand on the dashboard steadying itself as I took an exit ramp. A voice saying Sakura wa kure desu, neat and careful. Patient Japanese looking out the window at a tunnel of pink along the Kurume approach. This work has an odd rhythm to it. In the space of a few hours you build a deep emotional line with a stranger. In the space of a few weeks or months you watch that line sever. After a while, and this is something I am not sure a civilian would forgive me for saying, you start to observe the severance itself with a kind of cool, almost naturalist curiosity. People's lives are so various and so brief. That observation is not cold exactly, but it is not warm either. It is the vantage from which the work is actually doable. Without some version of that curiosity, I want to see who this next person will turn out to be. I would have stopped driving to Kurume within 6 months. With it I kept going for 2 years, and then for 10 more after that. Across those months, driving dozens of patients down the same stretch of expressway, I began to notice that the patients who did better in the system, not necessarily medically, but in the navigable sense, the sense that their treatment journey stayed on the rails, were not the ones I would have predicted. They were not the ones with the most education. They were not the ones with the most money. They were not the ones with the most articulate theories about cancer biology. They were the ones who could describe their own situation in their own words. The general contractor talked about his cash flow and his disease in the same matter of fact register. The semiconductor engineer verified the reading of his own imaging studies. The school teacher arrived at her first appointment with a written plan for how she would brief her husband and adult daughter on each stage of the process. Conversely, the patients who could not decide anything in the room, who deferred entirely to a spouse or a son, who said only whatever the doctor thinks is best, tended sadly to be the ones who disappeared from the caseload mid-course. A person who has spent decades farming out their decisions to others will, when the stakes rise, farm out the most important decision of their life too. And the people they farm it out to may or may not be up to the job. This pattern did not track profession, or income, or education. It tracked one thing and one thing only: see whether the patient could speak about their own life, in their own language, in the first person. That measuring stick, picked up in the Kurume waiting room in duty 15, has stayed with me as the measuring stick I use for business partners a decade later. Can this person describe, in their own words, what they are asking me to do? If they cannot, I do not enter into partnership with them. Not because I think worse of them, because I have watched too many times what happens when a person in the passenger's seat cannot locate their own subject. Alongside that measuring stick, there was the other observation, the one that runs through the whole of this chapter. The moment any of these patients, regardless of station, sat down across from Dr. Ait, the things that had mattered outside the room mattered less. The general contractor was not a general contractor in there. The civil servant was not a civil servant. The man from the great corridor was not that man either. Each was for the span of the consultation, a body with a raised bump under the skin, and a question about how much sleep he would lose that week. It was not dignity being erased. If anything, a different kind of dignity surfaced. The dignity of a person who has understood, perhaps for the first time, which of the identities is the one that will outlast everything else. A few weeks later, over 2 cooling bowls of instant ramen at the small table in the Oreo apartment, my wife asked me, "Flightly, are you opening a company?" "I think so. Do you have the capital?" "No." "Are you going to do it anyway?" "Yes." She laughed a little. "Why?" "Because 40 families a month are calling my phone. If I say no, they call nobody." "I can live with a lot of things." "I do not think I can live with that." She nodded. "All right, try it." That was the conversation. 2 bowls of instant ramen, a cheap aluminum kettle on our portable burner, the window cracked open for air because it was summer and the fan had died. I do not think she said try it because she believed in my business plan. I think she said it because she had watched me for the past year and had understood, the way a spouse understands, that the version of me that took the theater job would not be habitable to live with. She was choosing the husband she would rather share a life with. The calculation was about the marriage, not the business. The company was registered in the summer that followed. Shinihao Cross Border Medical Coordination. 1 employee, me, until I could afford to hire the first staff member. 1 office. 1 phone line. A used fax machine for the insurance paperwork that in those years still required faxes, which was most of it. The car, for a while yet, was still the rented Aqua. 2 weeks before the registration, I was driving a man in his early 40s back from Kurume. Semiconductors Ch.2, young children, a wife in the back seat. He said, looking out the window at a hillside of rice terraces, "Mr. Lin, I want to ask you something not about the treatment." "Go ahead. What made you do this work?" The honest answer was a phone call I picked up because I needed the money. It sounded flippant, and he did not deserve flippant. A family asked me to help them. I said yes. The next family asked. I said yes again. Here we are. He nodded slowly. "I think that is how most real things start," he said. People over-describe the beginning afterward. At the time, you just say yes. He died about 4 months after that drive in a hospital in Taipei. His wife sent me a message a few days later, "Mr. Lin, thank you." He said at the end that Japan was beautiful. The cherry blossoms were beautiful. I read it at the desk I had just rented in the space I was about to put a company name on. I did not cry. I sat with the message for a long time. Then I went back to signing the lease. The next morning, the phone rang at 6. I picked up. The descriptions in this chapter reflect the author's memory of coordinating care for Taiwanese patients through a clinical trial at Kurume University in 2014 and 2015, and related encounters with patients, families, and other actors in the cross-border medical field during that period. All patients are anonymized. Nothing in this chapter should be read as a claim of efficacy for any specific therapy, as a recommendation for any treatment, or as medical advice. Cancer treatment decisions should be made with qualified physicians who know the patient's history and current clinical guidelines. That is the end of this chapter. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next one.